Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started here. First, I want to thank you all for coming today. I know this is very early for a lot of you, so making the time to join our webinar. Thank you, and welcome to our webinar on the Utility Transition Hub. The Utility Transition Hub is a tool our team has built to provide data visualizations, analysis, and insights, and data for download to all for free on utility financials and operations. So during our time today, I will briefly introduce RMI and the speakers, provide an overview of the hub, hand it over to Jeff St. John to discuss how he has been able to use the hub in his reporting and opportunities for future work, and then walk you all through the portal. We'll round off the session with some Q&A from the audience. So some of you may be familiar with our organization, but for those of you who are not, this tool has been put together by our team at RMI. RMI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research firm focused on market-driven change in the energy industry. We're over 300 big and have offices across the globe. I am personally based near the Oakland office, as is Jeff, who you'll be hearing from in a bit. If you have additional questions about RMI, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or take a look at our website. So you will be hearing from myself and Jeff St. John from Canary Media today. To briefly introduce myself, I'm an associate on our carbon-free electricity team, and I am also a member of the development team for the Utility Transition Hub. There's a bit more background on me on the slide here if you'd like to take a look. Our second speaker, Jeff, is Director of News and Special Projects for Canary Media, writing on all things energy and climate. We'll be hearing more from him about how he has been able to use the hub in his reporting work later on, but feel free to take a look at his bio, also listed here. So let's go ahead and dive right into the hub. As an organization, we know the energy transition is a collaborative effort, and so we wanted to equip all stakeholders that are interested and impacted by this transition with free, publicly available data related to electric utilities in the US. Much of what we see from utilities is around their reported climate goals and activities and what they do to align themselves with those goals, including clean energy deployment and fossil retirement. This is what we see as the tip of the iceberg, looking at the graphic here on the right. Our tool aims to go below the waterline and give users the full picture on how utilities are spending their money and how they are operating. This is why our tool includes investments, customers and communities, policies, and operation and planning. These metrics are key drivers of climate outcomes, and we hope this can bring together stakeholders to engage in data-driven conversations about the transition. There are a set of questions we are looking to answer with our tool. The types of questions we're aiming to answer include how aligned are utilities with the Paris Climate Agreement, as well as their stated goals? How are utilities investing in fossil and renewables? And how have those decisions impacted their customers' bills? What progress have utilities made on emissions reductions, and have utilities been significantly influenced by state policy and regulation? How does an individual utility compare to other utilities, and what solutions are available to accelerate the transition to clean energy in an affordable and equitable way? This is all to say we have a lot of information that can answer many questions related to the transition and utility accountability. So when I say the Utility Transition Hub, what I'm really speaking about is three components. The first, and what I'll be demonstrating in a bit, is the portal. The portal houses our data in an online Tableau format, allowing users to navigate through the data using visualizations and easy filtering. The second component is our insights. These are deeper dive analysis briefs we provide on our website of interesting stories we found in the data through our work with the data. Finally, all of our data is available for download in tidy data format, which is just a digestible data format, to allow folks who would like to perform their own analysis on the data to do so. Based on your interest and your time, you may only want to focus on one of these components, but they're all connected and here to provide quality public data. So what is the scope of the hub? I want to lay out what data we have and what data we currently do not have, but are working to bring in. Currently, we only provide data across all categories for FERC Form 1 respondents. These are utilities that are required to report their financial statements to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. For those utilities, we have operation and financial data. We also have average customer bill breakdown and energy burden, a more recent addition, which are calculated on our end using the publicly reported data. We're in the process of incorporating purchase power data, which means we are identifying the power resources utilities are actually purchasing generation from when they contract out generation. We're also adding in plant level data, emissions projections, health and workforce impacts, economic competitiveness, and other geographies and utilities. I'm going to briefly touch on some of our sources, and then we'll turn it over to Jeff St. John and then head into a short demonstration. So most of our data is sourced from two federal reporting and regulatory agencies. The first is the Energy Information Agency, or the EIA, and the second is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which I mentioned in the last slide. Our policy data is gathered from a multitude of public sources, including legislative dockets and public policy databases. The real value we're adding with our tool is aggregating together this public data, cleaning it, and adding some additional analysis, for example, the customer bill breakdown and the energy burden, and then providing all of that in the three components of the hub. If you have questions about any of our sources, feel free to drop them in the Q&A portion of the chat. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff St. John to talk about his use of the hub, and then I'll walk everyone through the portal, and then we will open up for Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Can everyone hear me? We're good? Great. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining this morning. I'm really grateful to have been invited to share about the Utility Transition Hub and how I'd like to use it. My name is Jeff St. John. I'm Director of News and Special Projects for Canary Media. We're an independent nonprofit journalism organization and affiliate of RMI, and please do come and check us out at www.canarymedia.com. First of all, I want to let you all know that, of course, this stuff is complicated, and there are a number of variables to consider when you're delving into the data in this hub. Caitlin has gone over some of the complications, and as all of you know, it's important to take these data as a starting point for your research and reporting and make sure you're taking individual utilities' foibles and the foibles of data collection into account. Temporary unusual adjustments to utility earnings, discrepancies in how data is reported to FERC and compiled by the hub can yield results that need to be gut checked. And you're going to want to learn the nomenclature of how the hub categorizes things. For example, steam is mainly coal plants, but there are very few plants that aren't coal that are called steam. So anyway, anyone who's worked with complex databases will understand that this kind of thing is par for the course, and you're going to want to explore how this works and how it can help you inform what you're doing. But I should note that quite a bit of the data collected here by RMI is eminently suitable for deadline reporting. Take this policies and regulations page. I don't know how many of you have been covering a breaking story on a particular policy implementation by a state legislature or utility regulator and have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to track down what other states or regulators have done that is similar to or the same as the thing you're covering, or compare and contrast what your subject state has done to what others have done. This page is a really valuable resource for that kind of reporting, and I've certainly found it pretty useful. Or say you want to find out what your local utilities generation mix is and how it compares to the national average or other utilities in your region. The operations tab can give you that data in terms of nameplate generating capacity, as well as how much power was actually generated by those resources from year to year. Likewise, the emissions tab is really useful for a fast data pull on a utility's carbon footprint, both in absolute terms of megatons of carbon emitted, or in intensity, which measures on a per megawatt hour of generation basis, which allows you to control for the fact that many utilities are growing their electricity generation capacity over time. But the hub is also a really valuable resource for uncovering critical data for anyone reporting on utilities and energy, as referenced by this image of an iceberg that Caitlin showed us at the start of the presentation. And the idea here is that there's a lot more going on at utilities, and there's a lot more to think about in terms of the impacts of what utilities do on their communities and their local economies than what's contained in their public news releases and disclosures. Sure, utilities report on how much clean energy they've deployed, how much fossil fuel they've retired, or how their latest rate case will reduce rates in the short term, but they don't commonly report incredibly valuable information like, for example, how their past investment decisions may have left ratepayers on the hook for future costs, or how the negative economic impacts of their past decisions have been spread inequitably across different members of their customer base. The Utility Transition Hub can give you insight into these under the waterline data points and help you answer the questions that matter the most to your readers. One of the most important things to understand about regulated utilities is that they earn money, a guaranteed rate of return on their capital expenditures, right? That they make money by spending money on building stuff, on investing in capital assets. This, of course, means that they're highly incentivized to build as much new stuff as possible or sink as much money into capital improvements as possible, and that they continue to earn back those capital investments for decades, whether or not the assets they invested in are cost effective, let alone whether or not they're actively contributing to catastrophic climate change. So under the Finances tab, the Utility Transition Hub can show us this data using the Assets and Earnings metrics subtabs up at the kind of top in those black boxes to show what portion of assets and earnings are tied up in which types of generation capacity. Now, sunk investments into coal plants have grown dramatically, despite the fact that coal plant retirements are, happening faster than ever. And ratepayers are going to be on the hook for paying off those sunk investments into coal plants, unless, that is, structures can be put in place to reduce that burden on customers. Some of these options include securitization of coal plant investments, or market indexing to, well, I won't get into these things, but check out some really good reports from RMI and the Sierra Club to learn more about securitization and market indexing. These are, let's be frank, complicated potential solutions to this problem of sunk fossil fuel investments and how to retire those assets on an accelerated schedule to combat climate change. How does this apply to the states and utilities you're covering? This is a great place to try to learn a little bit more. Likewise, under the Customers and Community tab, the Utility Transition Hub can break down what portion of an individual utility bill goes to pay for what types of fuels and compare that to the national average. And the Policies and Regulation page, once again, can tell you whether your state does or doesn't have securitization or market indexing policies on the books or in the process of being formulated. I think it'd be really interesting to find out whether your local utility is very heavy on coal costs compared to national averages or regional averages, including potentially the cost of coal that's no longer able to compete cost effectively against cheaper and cleaner resources, and ask your utilities and regulators why that's the case. The same kind of analysis can apply to the fact that utility costs are not shared equally across all their customers. What is your local utility's energy burden compared to the national average? The Customer and Communities tab can show you that. Scholars consider that paying anything over 6% of your monthly income on energy constitutes an unsustainable energy burden. How much higher is the energy burden for your target utility's lowest earning customers? Shown there on the bottom middle graph. How has your state utility regulator or legislature worked on this problem, perhaps by creating special rate classes to relieve their hardest working customers of this undue burden? If they haven't done that, how come? If they have, are those rate classes or rate treatments making a difference? These are all questions that can be asked more authoritatively, I think, when you have the data to back them up. So these are some of the ways that the Utility Transition Hub has informed my reporting, and I hope that my examples are helpful to you. Back to you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Jeff. So next up, we are going to do a walkthrough of the portal. The link is here and possibly in the chat as well, if you'd like to follow along. So I'm going to briefly stop my share so I can switch over to the portal. Okay, here we go. So here we are at the web page. When you arrive at the web page, you'll see links to access our insights, data for download, and the portal, which we will be walking through today. If you scroll down through the landing page, you'll get a nice visual story of the hub and some key insights pulled from our data. I'm going to go ahead and open up the portal and walk us through 3 of the 7 dashboards. So as you'll see here, we have 7 dashboards lining up with the topics I discussed earlier in the presentation. You can access each dashboard by using the tabs at the top or simply clicking one of the buttons here. The first dashboard I'm going to walk us through is the finances dashboard. Before I dive into the contents of the dashboard, I just want to point out some of the navigational functionality of the dashboard. You'll see on the left here that we have 3 panels to filter down to a specific utility or a specific technology. You can simply just click that tech or that utility to filter down. For the technologies listed here, you can assume that the majority of other fossil is populated with gas, and the majority of the steam category is referring to coal, with the exception of a handful of coal plants that were retrofitted for gas. For utilities, you can also open up this dropdown and select multiple utilities you want to look at or a single utility, then press apply. And at the very top, we have additional toggles to allow you to change the metric shown, switch between assets, all assets, or just generation, and finally allow you to filter to a specific category of utilities. You can also look at any of these in real numbers or in percentages. So now that we've gone over the general structure, let's walk through the contents of the finance dashboard. So you can look at 3 metrics: assets, earnings, and investments. For today, we're going to focus just on assets, and we're also further only going to focus on generation. So without down selecting any utility, we're looking at national level trends in utility CapEx investment. Focusing on generation, we can see the top graph, cumulative investment, net of depreciation, i.e. net of book value, by regulated utilities in fossil plants more than doubled from 2005 to 2020. In most instances, as Jeff mentioned earlier, this means customers will be paying off that investment in these assets through their rates for many years to come. So focusing in on just one utility, I forgot to mention, so these are parent companies up here, and these are regulated operating companies below those parent companies below. So we're going to filter to just Duke Energy, the parent company, and we can see here down below, these are the operating companies held by Duke Energy. Okay, so just Duke Energy, we can see that they have a steady increase in their investment in fossil assets since 2005. And the bottom graph is showing us that these costs are not just built on building new capacity, but also in investing in new tech like pollution controls and repairing existing uneconomic fossil capacity. You can also see in Duke's investment in assets a complete lack in renewable resources, as we can see that the technology doesn't even show up here. So now we're going to take things over to the emissions dashboard. And in the emissions dashboard, we can see national trends again. So for yearly emissions, we are seeing a downward trend nationally in all pollutants: CO2, NOx and SOx, NOx and SOx of which are impactful to health impacts on communities. Down selecting again, we're going to look at Entergy. And here we can see the total emissions for energy has actually been increasing over time, alternate to the national average. Looking at the specific resources here on the graph, we can see that emissions from coal has been declining, but only to be replaced with an increase in emissions from gas over time. These emissions have a real impact on the health and communities surrounding these plants. So speaking of communities, let's look at the communities and customers dashboard. So like Jeff and I have both mentioned, all of the investment decisions made by utilities are then recuperated through rates. The customers and community dashboard shows you how those investments break down in customer bills. This dashboard is rich with information. So if you're overwhelmed, it's okay. We'll break it down. We have bills over time, this top graph here. We have bills by income group, this left bottom graph, and customer type breakdown here, and then number of employees by resource. We can also toggle for different metrics up here. So in these top boxes here, we can break it down between energy bill and energy burden, which is a recent addition that I mentioned during the presentation. We can also look at all electricity or all energy. I'll briefly take us over there to show you all what that looks like. So here we can see what customers are paying in other fuels on top of their electricity bill, which gives us a total bill. And we can also, again, put it back into percent or numbers. For the purposes of this, we are going to look at just electricity and energy burden. So here we can see the national energy burden rests just below 1.5%. The energy burden for the lowest income bracket, or the 0 to 30% AMI, which is considered very low income groups, rests just below 13%. Scholars have found that energy burden over 6% can force households into unsafe or unhealthy circumstances, requiring them to make decisions between paying for their power or risk getting shut off, or buying food or healthcare or other essentials. So again, focusing on just one utility, this time an operating company, and specifically Kentucky Power. So looking at Kentucky Power, it has the highest energy burden of the reporting operating companies. Majority of that burden goes to support uneconomic coal resources, as we can see here. We can also see that energy burden for the lowest income bracket in Kentucky Power's territory is over 16%, dangerously high. So there's a lot to garner from here, and Jeff St. John has mentioned a lot of our other dashboards. Feel free, if you pulled up the link, to explore those and also drop questions on those in the chat. Hopefully this walkthrough is a good start to uncovering many of the stories that lie within our data. I also want to emphasize that this tool is actively evolving. We're adding new functionality and new data on a regular basis. We're also here to support you if you have questions or concerns about the data or questions about how to use it. Our team is interested in your feedback and in answering your questions about the hub and any of its components. So please don't hesitate to reach out to our inbox or to me directly. I'm going to go back and share that information with you. Okay, so here's my email and our tools inbox. And now, with a lot of time left, we are going to open up for Q&A. Okay, taking a look at the questions. Okay, so we have a question here from Jim Tucker. Reading, in the screen with the customer energy costs, does that cost number include natural gas used at home or only electricity? Thanks. So I think I got to this a little near the end of the presentation of the customer and community tab, but you can toggle between electricity or just energy as the toggle. So when you select energy, you'll see natural gas and or oil if customers are using that to heat their home. And then you can also see electricity broken down separately. Okay, the next question we have here is, so we don't include PPAs. There are lots of instances where utilities are buying renewables from other generating companies. Thank you, Jeremy. That is correct. We are working on including purchase power and exchanges, and that is present on the operations dashboard. but the emissions are all scope 1 right now. So when you're looking at the emissions dashboard, we aren't representing that. We have a question from Kim on how recent the data in the hub is and how do we keep it relatively fresh. The date of the hub right now is 2020 data. Our release data follows the release data of the FERC and the EIA data, which is put out yearly. There is monthly data released from the EIA, but it's not validated. And so we are trying to provide the most accurate data possible and following that yearly schedule right now. We do make changes and additions more regularly than that. The tool is only about a year, almost a year old now. And so we're still adding and building new metrics, adding new things. But right now, in terms of data freshness, we are doing a yearly cadence. Okay, so David asks, is there a key somewhere to understand more about the sources of the data and the meaning of terms? So that's a great question. The data download, which is the portion that you can click on the website and download all of our data, includes a data dictionary, which has definitions for all of the terms, what each metric means, and the sources that we pulled it from. We're also working on adding in additional information for those particular like words and jargon that may not be accessible to everyone, not in the industry or even in a specific part of the industry. As well, if you look at our methodology document or press the help button, there will be more information on what's on that dashboard as well. Looking to see if there are more questions that haven't been answered. Someone asked if when we release the recording that we could send out the links or the chat window. We will certainly include all the links. We will also have the presentation available, which includes some links, but we can try to add more in before we send it out to make sure you guys have access to all of this. Someone asked about help for misinterpreting our data on the hub. Jeff, you're welcome to speak on this, given your work.
Well, I can tell you that my experiences with the hub, I've had a lot of help from the folks involved in this to try to make sure that I am properly understanding what it is I think I'm seeing on the hub. Luckily, I got introduced to the hub by RMI, and so I had folks who were coming to me with the express intention of helping me understand how it's used and how to get the answers to questions I'm looking for from it. I can tell you that they're really good at doing it, and I guess I'd defer to the folks at RMI about how busy they think they're going to be answering those questions, but they've been great as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, we're happy to receive emails for questions on clarification for our data or just on how to use the data. So don't hesitate to reach out to the email that I put up for us. And we will also be sending that out as a follow-up. But yeah, I'm glad that we've been helpful to you, Jeff.
Me too. Thanks.
Okay, so we have a question on, is there a way to identify the original data source on any given metric to independently verify? So the data sources used for each aspect of the hub are listed in the data dictionary document in the data download page. So I know that's like a slightly additional step to download that, but when you go to that page, you can just download the data dictionary if that's all that you're interested in. And you can see where our sources come from for each metric we provide. In the data download, we also have some additional metrics that you don't get to see on the portal. So if you're interested in seeing what's in there, you can also just look at the data dictionary to see what else we're providing. And if those are metrics that you're interested in, you can use the data download to explore those. So someone asked, I know people in my newsroom might benefit from this. Could you do additional trainings? We certainly can do additional trainings. We have been doing demonstrations like this sort of ad hoc on an as requested basis. So feel free to reach out in that form to our email, but also doing this as a series, maybe diving into each dashboard more fully rather than giving a brief overview could be something we could explore and include. That's helpful feedback. Thank you. Let's see. Just looking in the chat to make sure I didn't miss any of the questions. Let's see. We have a few questions in the chat that could use some clarification. So Robin, when you say, are there navigators available to assist in promoting and accurate reporting of the data? Could you clarify what you mean in the chat? And I can try to answer that. And let's see. Kim asked, are there data that you would like to collect but have no way to track it? For example, future plans, directions for a utility like renewables, undergrounding power lines for safety. Is this a goal for the hub at all? This is a great question. All the ones you listed are obviously very interesting. We would love to include those. Other metrics that we would love to include but don't have access to, nationally at least, are reports on disconnections for customers. We think that would be a huge addition to the customers and community page, as well as customers on payment plans. That data is not reported in all utilities, so that would be really helpful to have. In terms of other metrics, we, like I said in the PowerPoint, are hoping to include workforce and health metrics. We're looking to bring it down to the plant level data. That is requiring a lot of upfront work on our end that it just takes time. So hopefully we will get to that in the next few months and be able to put that up on the hub. We're also looking here soon to add in purchase power emissions. So right now the emissions only represents scope 1 emissions, but that would allow us to bring in scope 2 emissions, which can be huge in terms of tracking utility progress on emissions. And yeah, I mean, we're also open to feedback. So if there are metrics that you see would be really important for you to have reported through the hub, please email us and reach out about those. We love suggestions and would love to hear more recommendations on what metrics could be useful to folks. Are there any metrics that you can think of, John, that you would like to see? Okay, so we also have, will yearly data be archived for year-over-year analysis? So all of our data, especially data for download, is from 2005 to 2020, like I said. So the freshest data we have right now is 2020, and that's because that is the most recent data reported by EIA and FERC. So those are the years that we can provide for analysis on. Let's see.
I wanted to jump in real quick. Catherine Mortimer asked how to find data for her state, New Mexico. It wasn't seeing PSC New Mexico. I have done a little bit of playing around. In this case, I jumped in. I clicked on the policies and regulations page. I clicked on the state of New Mexico. That led me to a company emissions page and statewide emissions page. And there I found PNM Resources listed as one of the key parent companies of regulated operating company, Public Service Co. of New Mexico. And then I clicked on that. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but that's one way to do it. Use the map.
Yeah, using the map certainly helps. And also just seeing where you are and what utility service territory you're in. And I just want to emphasize, I think there might be a few questions about this, but going back to what we do include, we only include FERC Form 1 respondents. So not all utilities are required to report financial statements to FERC. So we don't include all utilities. That is certainly something we are hoping to expand, hoping to add, but right now that's not included in the hub. So your utility might not be in there, but know that we are working to include that data and trying to figure out how we can get data across both operations, emissions, and finances for utilities that don't require reporting to FERC. Is the data from the hub used to inform insights and RMI's reports? Are there any RMI reports you recommend reading? So the data in the hub is used to inform our insights. Additionally, throughout CFE, folks are using the hub data for all types of analysis related to electric utilities, including looking at IRPs over time, so utility IRP processes and how policies have impacted those. Really, all of our data, if you would go to EIA and pull data on emissions or operations or anything like that, we already have that data cleaned and validated. And so we just kind of take an extra step out of that analysis. So a lot of folks on our team use that data for their analysis because we've already gone through, cleaned it, identified it, and validated it.
Yeah, I'd like to put a plug in here for the insights page, if I may. The story I wrote about the launch of the hub included a number of those key insights, which I thought were fascinating, including the divergence between stated kind of net zero goals and the trajectory of emissions baked into utilities' existing, investments into different types of fossil fuel power, as well as the increasing cost burden that's being borne by customers due to the investments in coal, which leads, to the question of how do we get utilities and regulators together on plans to successfully retire those assets early while kind of protecting customers from the costs that those would impose. So there's a lot of really interesting story ideas. One that is a little bit wonky, but I thought I'd bring up real quick, is the issue of tax normalization, which is pretty wonky, but maybe interesting to folks who are covering the conflict between regulated utilities and independent renewable energy developers over the proper way to incentivize the construction of a whole bunch of new solar and wind power. This has to do with federal tax treatment and provisions in the Build Back Better bill. It's a highly controversial issue. Boils down to whether utilities should be incentivized to invest their own money in clean energy, or whether rule changes and tax code changes that would encourage that utility investment might undermine the market and opportunities for independent clean energy developers to continue to take this leading role in developing clean energy. And if you're interested in how those conflicts are being played out in your state or region, I bet you could probably ask RMI for help on that.
Certainly. So I believe we have a hand raised, and I'm happy to hear directly. Robin, if you want to unmute and ask your question, feel free. Okay.
I thought I'd jump off of what John answered to Paul's question about NRG energy. IPPs don't fill out the forms that feed this database, right? And IPPs are an important part of the landscape, particularly and obviously in deregulated or competitive energy markets across most of the Northeast, Illinois, certainly Texas, obviously. I think when I asked that question, when I first encountered the hub, the folks at RMI pointed out that's definitely true. At the same time, I forget what the stat is about which number of the largest vertically integrated utilities are responsible for what portion of the country's total power sector emissions. So yeah, it's trickier to get data on IPPs for sure, but there's still plenty of interest and kind of value in getting into what the regulated utilities are doing, particularly the biggest ones.
Yeah. And on top of that, I touched on it a bit earlier, but when you look at the portal, we have a drop down for filtering for different types of utilities. So what that means is we mostly have data on IOUs or investor-owned utilities, and we have minimal data on co-ops and a few of the other smaller utilities. But most of those other utilities that are not IOUs are not required to report their financial statements. And so we do not have that data on our hub. Let's see. I'm just looking for a few more questions here. We might end up ending a little bit early. Someone asked about the climate alignment dashboards and what the projections represent. So the climate alignment dashboards is looking at what we see the 1.5C climate alignment to be and what we're seeing as the company's goals to meet that. and just a simple projection off of where they're at now. So when we add in purchase power data, we will be able to do a more comprehensive assessment of the current emissions of those utilities and future emissions or potential future emissions of those utilities going forward. So that's something we are really eager to work on so that we can provide better estimates for projected emissions for folks wanting to compare how utilities are looking at their emissions and trying to align that with 1.5C climate alignment or even their stated goals. Someone asked about making the hub a central repository. I would say we're certainly building out our insights page, and feel free to check that out. That's ongoing. We are adding to that regularly as we find new stories and insights through our work. And Jeff has found the insights page to be helpful, so that's great. And even just scrolling through, so that landing page, I alluded that you can scroll down and see the storyline, see some high-level insights. That is a nice way to walk through sort of the overarching story of the hub, and some really pretty visualizations and charts for you to look at. So that could be a good way to start. And then going into the portal will allow you to dive deeper into a specific utility, look at a specific geography for policies, and look at all of those different metrics that we highlighted today. Someone asked about collaboration. We're certainly interested in collaboration, so please reach out to our email. We want to hear from you, and we want to know about how we can make our tool the most useful to your work in reporting or in learning about utilities and their impact on the communities that you're in. So I think that we've settled down in questions. If anyone wants to add something very quickly, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. But otherwise, this webinar was recorded, so we will send that out to all of you, and it will be shareable. You can send it to anyone that you think it would be relevant to, but they weren't able to attend because I know it's 7 a.m. in the West Coast. And we will also share all of the links from the chat and our email if you want to reach out or follow up. But otherwise, thank you all for attending and getting a brief overview of the tool that we've been working on. And thank you, Jeff, for coming and representing Canary Media.
Thank you, Caitlin. And thanks to all the team who's put all this data together.
Yes, we have a big team backing all of this. All right, have a great day, everyone.